ladies and gentlemen, it is for me a great honor to accept the 2016 Klaus J. Jacobs Research Prize. I've known the Jacobs Foundation for many years through the work that it funds. I'm very familiar, for instance, with the evaluation of innovative nurseries targeted at deprived children and communities in Colombia, which has been a study that's been funded by the foundations. And Colombia is a country where I've done much of my research in this field. I'm also aware of some of the other amazing work that the foundations funds throughout the developing world and beyond. This is fundamental research that generates new data, methods, and knowledge of huge relevance for the design of policies to improve the life chances of children and youth around the globe. The Jacobs Foundation invests in important research, and it does not mind taking risks. And that's what it takes to achieve results. I've also long been an admirer of the work of the previous recipients of this award: Armstrong Caspi, Terry Moffitt, Greg Duncan, Michael Meany, Sarah Jane Blakemore. So when I was told that I'd been awarded this prize, I was both elated and humbled. Being put in the same group as the previous winner is incredibly flattering for me. But perhaps most importantly, I was elated because this generous award will give our research group the opportunity to pursue a new and exciting research project. And I'll come back to that in a minute. First of all, let me say that I'm a card-carrying economist. A legitimate question that I'm often asked is, what is an economist doing working on child development? Or, so if you're an economist, are you going to do the cost-benefit analysis of this particular intervention? So let me try to answer those questions. Human development from conception to adulthood is an extremely complex process. What economists call human capital is a multidimensional object. Nutritional and health status, cognitive skills, and socio-emotional development interact dynamically over time during the years of development in ways that only now we are starting to understand. Biological and neurological processes are affected by endowments, environmental factors, parental behavior, and other inputs. Economists such as myself model this process as a whole, taking into account the interplay between the many determinants of human development and their interactions with the motivations and constraints driving the choices of the various actors, in particular the parents. We use key insights on the underlying mechanisms from other sciences, but incorporate them in a holistic model of what we call the production function of human capital, taking causation very seriously. This approach allows us not only to estimate the impacts of a specific intervention, say using a randomized controlled trial, but to understand the mechanisms that lead to that impact. And that is key for extrapolating those results to different contexts and for the design of policies. Our understanding of human development in the early years has improved tremendously over the last 20 years. But there are still many unanswered questions. Some of this relates to the kind of skills children need to achieve their full potential, the way in which resources are allocated within the household, or the relative role of resource constraints or beliefs and attitudes that parents might have. Others relate to the timing of key events. At what ages are nutrition or stimulations, for example, most important? Are there windows of opportunities that are particularly significant for specific developmental domains and salient for policy? Given the inevitable budget constraints that faced by policymakers, they need to know when is optimal to intervene and in what dimensions, taking into account that parents might react reinforcing or diluting a given intervention. We can only do this if we understand the mechanisms behind the data we observe. It has become widely recognized that investing in the early years is important, as what happens then has long-run consequences. So the attention that early years interventions have recently received in policy circle is very welcome. But this fashion is not without risks. Early years interventions are not easy. Generic, badly designed, or badly targeted interventions may fail, potentially leading to a policy backlash. And that would be a great shame, as I genuinely believe that earliest interventions have a huge potential. Each context is different, and interventions must be adapted to it. Scaling up at the regional or national level is a big challenge. We need to consider the financial and human resources available to administer a program on a large scale and deliver cost-effective benefits while maintaining fidelity to the original design. A profitable approach, therefore, could be to use a relatively prescriptive curriculum that could be implemented by personnel with limited specializations. There is another subtle issue, set of issues that is relevant for scaling up. If we are aiming to influence parenting practices, which may be based on strongly held beliefs and attitudes, we need to convey the relevant messages in a meaningful and direct way. Therefore, community participation and ownership of the relevant programs is key. How do we get that ownership, that participation in a scaled-up intervention? Well, piggybacking on pre-existing social networks and social programs might be useful. In our interventions in Colombia and now in India, we have used local women to deliver our interventions, and we think that's very important. The new research we will carry out with the Jacobs Research Prize funds aims at addressing some of these issues in the Indian state of Odisha. We have been working there already for a few years, developing and evaluating 3 different stimulations and nutrition interventions aimed at very young children, aged around 12 months when we start the intervention, and who we are following for 2 years. We are doing this in 192 villages, randomly allocated to control and treatment groups in our randomized control trial. Next year, when the study ends, we will estimate the impacts of these interventions and study the mechanisms that have generated them. At that point, the children will be 3. So the next challenge will be to design and evaluate an intervention to improve the small community centers that most of them attend, which are called Anganwadi centers. With the funding from the Jacobs Foundation, we will be able to re-randomize the 192 villages and trial an intervention aimed at improving the Anganwadi centers. This design, therefore, will give rise to 4 groups of villages. One will be a pure control group. One group will receive the early but not the late intervention. One will receive the late but not the early intervention. And one group will receive both. This design will allow us to evaluate both interventions separately, as well as their joint effect, enabling us to estimate possible complementarities between the 2 interventions. This is a unique opportunity that we will be able to follow thanks to the award. And therefore, we'll be able to answer important questions about when is it optimal to start interventions and the extent to which early interventions need to be complemented by subsequent ones to get sustained and lasting impacts. It's an incredibly exciting project for my research group, and one that I hope will deliver important scientific and policy lessons in keeping with the aims of the Jacobs Foundation. I would like to conclude my remarks by acknowledging the intellectual depths I have, and I want to begin by mentioning 2 people who have been particularly important for what I've done in this field. First and foremost, I would like to thank Sally Grantham McGregor, who's here tonight, from whom I learned most of what I know about child development. Sally's work is well known, and I do not need to emphasize its importance here. But I do want to mention Sally's generosity and enthusiasm, which is boundless. She has helped us immeasurably in our projects in Colombia and in India, and has shaped our research in a fundamental way. Second, I would like to thank my colleague and friend Kostas Megir. This research is a journey we started together a few years ago after reading and discussing one of Sally's papers. Kostas and I have pushed and argued and fought and discussed and helped each other in many ways. I know that this research agenda would have been very different without his contribution. Over the years, I've been very lucky to have the chance to interact with many first-rate researchers, colleagues and friends from whom I've learned a lot over the years. I would like to mention some of them: Caridad Araujo, Ellen Baker-Henningham, Raquel Bernal, Jerry Berman, Gabriela Conti, Flavio Cunha, Camila Fernandez, Hemla Fitzsimons, Jim Heckman, John Lombardi, Jimena Peña, Marta Rubio, and Norbert Shadi, Marcos Vera, just to mention a few. Carrying out this type of research requires a very strong team. We have been designing and adapting complex interventions, implementing them on a relatively large scale, and been running large longitudinal surveys in sometimes very difficult conditions to evaluate them. We have faced problems that are conceptual, logistical. I could tell you lots of really interesting anecdotes about the logistics of doing this work, statistical and financial. Without the skill, dedication, passion, and good humor of the research team at the IFS, none of this would have been possible. Some of the fantastic researchers that have worked with me on these projects, Alison Andrew, Britta Osberg, Pamela Jervis, Sarah Catton, Beth Kayers, Marta Rubio, are here tonight, and I thank them all for their crucial contributions. And of course, research in developing countries cannot happen without local partners. We were extremely lucky, both in Colombia and in India, to have exceptional teams to work with. I would like to thank in particular our Indian partners, CESED and Pratham, and in particular Rukmini Banerjee, Smriti Pawar, and Moni Malika Dey. Finally, I need to mention the support I received from my family, who's here, who had to put up with my trips and constant babbling about research. So my wife, Maria Teresa, and my children, Matteo and Laura. I'm delighted to accept the prize in recognition of the importance of the research agenda, the many contributions of the diverse team of researchers that work with me on it, and in the hope and expectation of many continued interactions and more exciting research findings in the future. Thank you very much.